the July meeting of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board and ask Esther to give us an invocation.
May we bow. This evening as we come together, may we gather here to conduct the business of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board. We thank Thee, O God, for our community and family. We ask that You will strengthen us, restore us, and inspire us with Your infinite wisdom. In troubled times as these, we ask that You fill our world with peace. Fill our leaders with solutions for the woes of our nation. And fill our town with the grace, mercy, and understanding for all within our borders. We pray for the families of the servicemen who gave their lives while serving our country this week. Fill their families' lives with comfort and peace. Continue to bless our first defenders here in the town of Morrisville. We pray for their continued safety as they protect and defend us. Bless our town staff and board members and all those who work to keep our town in perfect peace. May what we do here tonight be pleasing in Thy sight and for the benefit of the citizens of Morrisville. All these things we ask in Thy name, O Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Esther. We have a quorum. The quorum is a minimum of 3 people, so we have a quorum, and Lee will be a voting member this evening. We heard from Rex that he's not able to attend, nor is Harleen. Any changes to the agenda from your side, Courtney?
No.
Okay. If we're comfortable with the agenda, I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda for this evening.
So move.
Have a second to that motion.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Agenda is adopted. Any changes or additions to the minutes from the June 8th meeting? Hearing none, if we could have a motion to approve those minutes.
Pardon.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the June 8th minutes as recorded.
A second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Thank you. So jumping right ahead to item 5. Ben, when you're ready.
Good evening. So tonight we're going to do, I'll give you a brief presentation, giving you an update on where we're at with the transportation plan, go over some of the draft recommendations we have based on the work that's been done to date. And then you'll see at your table you have a couple handouts. You have 3 maps, which are the current draft recommendation maps that were displayed to the public on June 29th. We'll talk about a little bit as part of the presentation. And then at the end, the paper-clipped packet includes a couple of exercises that we'll go through at the end of the presentation to allow you to give your input that we can then add in with the public input and the town council input we'll be getting that'll form what essentially will be the final draft recommendations that we'll bring back to you in August for the plan. So with that, we'll get moving along. Just a brief summary of the engagement so far. We had 1 open house last year. We had our last one this year. Just a few weeks ago on June 29th, we had 31 attendees. This one worked really well because we coordinated it with the open house for the Morrisville Carpenter Road widening project. So more than likely, a lot of the people came from the Morrisville Carpenter Road project, but we were able to capture them and get their input on broader transportation issues as well. So it seemed to work really well. We had good attendance and good input, as you can see from some of these pictures. And these exercises that you see in the pictures are what you'll be doing later on tonight as well. So give you an update on scenario planning. I included some slides that you saw at the last update we had several months ago, but since it's been a few months, figured I'd remind you with those slides of what we're doing, and then I can go through some of the results. So again, the scenario modeling process. Right now, we've actually gone through most of the steps you see where we finished testing the scenarios, and that's what we use to create some of the recommendations you'll see. Just a reminder of the place types that they represent the entire region. Again, with scenario planning, we started out using a lot of the information that was done for the regional project that was part of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Long Range Transportation Plan for the region, and we just moved it down to focus in on Morrisville. So as you can see, we did our micro process that has fed directly into the regional update, and we used our process really to look at some corridor-based scenarios, trying to answer the question, if we concentrate development along a certain corridor, what magnitude growth can we expect? How much growth will changing certain types of allowed land uses attract to a corridor? And we looked at 3 corridors: Town Hall Drive, McCrimmon Parkway, and NC 54. Again, the goal was to come up with some measurements out of the scenarios and we evaluated them using set of performance metrics or indicators, and again, calibrated to Morrisville specific and looking at a smaller area than certainly the regional did. The regional scenario planning generally looked at, I believe it was 10-acre squares, and we dropped ours down to, I believe, 2 to 5 acres. So we got much better data from that. We don't have the report cards yet, but this is what you'll see probably next time is the report cards that came out of the scenario planning. It's just an easy way to show how changing land uses along corridor will affect different indicators such as quality of place, sustainable growth, distribution of growth, and the transportation. And again, we should have some of those report cards ready for you at your next meeting, and the consultants will be here to explain those more in depth.
So is this done like a computer modeling, or is it a person sort of checking off? I mean, how exactly does that process work?
So with scenario planning, it is computer modeling. It's GIS based, and then the humans put the inputs in, and then we do go back and double check and make sure that nothing crazy comes out of the computer modeling. So getting to the corridors and the results from our scenario planning as part of this process, again, we did 3 scenarios for the 3 corridors. So we did a baseline scenario and then 2 alternative scenarios for Town Hall Drive, McCrimmon Parkway, and NC 54. As part of all that, for each of the scenarios, as you can see, we did 7 sub-regional model runs and then 7 regional model runs, and then had the analysis of the results. So this is not easy or quick process, which is why you haven't heard a whole lot over the last few months, because the consultants have been busy in the background trying to run all these scenarios and getting the results. So McCrimmon Parkway, we have the baseline scenario, which is essentially what our zoning and land use is today and future land use according to how it's zoned and according to our future land use plan today. And then we looked at 2 alternates. One, really trying to leverage the extension with a greater mixture of uses in that extension area, as well as still sticking with some industrial uses. And then the second alternate, looking at more regional employment and mixed uses in that extension area, and going more away from the industrial uses. So as you can see, the baseline scenario here, and the thing to get from the map really is that the more red or orange, the brighter the color, the more that area is attracting development. So the cooler the color, the blues and the light greens, those areas are not quite as attractive to development. So as you can see here, the TOD site is is attractive to development in the baseline scenario. A lot of that's because of how we have it zoned. And then the Wake Tech Watkins Road area is, of course, attractive. And again, that's because of what's going on there now and how it's currently zoned and how the future land use plan is. And as you can see with it's essentially the existing zoning and future land use plans for the McCrimmon extension itself, there's some attraction there, but certainly not as much as some of those other areas. With alternate one, which is still keeping some of that industrial zoning in the extension area, but expanding some of those suburban and mix of uses along the extension, especially, and having the industrial be a little bit further away from the road itself. You can see there is some more development and more attraction in the extension area, and of course the TOD and the Wake Tech areas still remain attractive, as well as moving on down McCrimmon towards Davis Drive. What we get from this information as far as going into transportation is, it looks like from this, there's going to be some growth there, but it's not going to overload the road network. There may be some access management that we'll need to do with the road, which we already are doing as part of the design. And then, showing that it's a good road for some multimodal considerations. And it's confirming that our cross-section of 4 lanes, median divided, is probably going to work. And then going to the alternate 2, you can see the hot spots spread out a little bit more, and more of the McCrimmon corridor as a whole becomes more attractive. And then you can see the Davis Drive McCrimmon Parkway intersection gets a little bit more attractive in this scenario as well. So that's where the consultants are saying that may be showing that intersection improvements may be warranted there, along with the access management and multimodal considerations from the previous scenario. So moving on to NC 54. Again, the baseline scenario is existing zoning and what the current future land use plan shows. Alternate 1 is putting some more mixed-use supportive uses near the higher ed, near the Wake Tech campus, but still, focusing more of the future growth around the Wake Tech area and not so much the rest of 54. Alternate 2, again, is focusing in on that 54 Wake Tech area, but then also allowing some potential redevelopment as you come, east on NC 54 towards Aviation Parkway, where some of the areas may be ripe for redevelopment into some neighborhood level commercial developments or suburban commercial. So as you can see, the baseline, the growth is attracted to essentially where it is today, with the TOD remaining very attractive. And then in alternate 1, you still have the attractiveness around TOD and Wake Tech, and down around Cary Parkway. The remainder of the corridor stays fairly cool in this one. And then going to alternate 2, you have a little bit more of an expansion of some of the hot spots, attracting development, again, around a little bit larger area between Wake Tech and the TOD site. And then again, Morrisville Parkway down to Cary Parkway is becoming a little bit more attractive. And then finally, we looked at Town Hall Drive. And we looked at this primarily to we wanted to see what the existing development is doing, but then look at, some potential of what it's going to do with our town center, with our current town center plans. And then if we look to expand our town center and maybe even get some development on the south side of Morrisville Carpenter Road, what would that do? How would changing some of the land uses in that area attract development? So, and as you can see, there's not a whole lot of change between the baseline and the 2 alternates. However, you do see some of the more attractiveness around town center, and then of course getting closer to that Morrisville Carpenter Road intersection. As you change land uses, you can get even more attractive to growth in that area. And again, the consultants will go over all this information again when they come back, and they'll have the report cards, which will be a lot easier to understand and correlate that to some of the transportation recommendations. So moving on to the transportation recommendations that we currently have in front of you. So to get the, especially for the roadway, to get to the roadway recommendations, we really we modeled the congestion, and we looked out to the year 2040, which is under the current regional model that's used to model congestion. That's the end year that's currently used. And we added in the committed projects that we have committed from NCDOT with the Aviation Parkway widening, the Morrisville Carpenter Road widening that we're doing, the McCrimmon extension, extending Lewis Stevens Drive, widening 54, and working on the Airport Boulevard and Aviation Parkway interchanges. But as you can see, 54 through town from McCrimmon down really to Weston Parkway is over capacity. It's red. That means it's bad. You can see parts of Davis Drive are getting into that red territory. The other parts are approaching the red territory. Orange is meaning it's pretty much at capacity. Red, it's over. But for the most part, other than those two roads, most of our roads are looking pretty good. Aviation Parkway still has some heavy congestion even in 2040 with the widening out towards I-40 once you're getting over the lake. But for the most part, our road network looks pretty good without a whole lot beyond the committed improvements. So going from this, they did some focus modeling in on some roads to determine do we need to change our recommendations from our current plan, or do we need to keep the same? One of those was Davis Drive. Our current plan is recommending 6 lanes in the future for Davis Drive. We had the question, well, will 4 lanes handle the traffic? And they looked at it with and without the Town Hall 147 extension, as well as maybe some additional widening of NC 54. And what the modeling showed is that Davis Drive is still going to have trouble and will still need to be 6 lanes in 2040. So at this point, that recommendation is going to remain in the plan that Davis Drive be a 6-lane boulevard. We looked at Airport Boulevard because we had questions about the future extension of that. You know, if we phase that extension, what will it do? If we don't have the extension, what will it do? So they looked at that. We did some modeling, and you can see that, you know, if you put the extension in, it does help. It helps alleviate traffic on McCrimmon Parkway, and so we do want to keep that in. One thing we will certainly look at as part of the plan is looking at funding it in phases or phasing it in the plan when it comes to the prioritization and funding, so that we don't have this large expense all at once, which will help with the budget. We also looked at Crabtree Crossing Parkway extension because that was actually in the public comments in the first round. We actually did receive quite a few public comments asking for Crabtree Crossing Parkway extension to be put back on the plan, asking why it wasn't on the plan. So we're looking at some focused modeling on that right now. And as you can see, the volumes are not bad on it. So with building it and adding in the Town Hall Drive extension and looking at Davis Drive and Airport Boulevard on it, it really is not seeing a ton of traffic. It's seeing a good bit, but still it'll be significantly under capacity if it were built even as a 2-lane road.
So I got a question. Why is there such a disparity in the AM and the PM? I mean, people just don't come home, or they don't go to work? I don't get how that works.
It's probably more related to travel patterns and how they would choose to go to work versus how they would choose to come home. Like picking up the kids or something. Okay. So, and some of it too may be the model itself. The model can be a little quirky on some of those. So, So looking at the roadway recommendation maps, these were created based on all the modeling, based on the modeling, the scenario modeling, and then the public input. As you can see, we have a lot of committed projects, which is great. Those are the ones that are highlighted in yellow that you see. And you have larger versions of the map at your desk as well, so that you can get a little bit closer look at them. But so as far as miles of improvements that are between the committed and then the proposed improvements, we'd have about a mile of access management improvements, 8.6 miles of new alignment roadway, 1.8 miles of relocation, 34.5 miles of widening, the 2 interchange improvements that are committed, the new roundabout on Town Hall Drive, as well as 13 intersection improvements that are recommended. And we can go more in depth on a lot of these. If you have questions, I can answer them tonight, but we can also go more in depth next meeting when the consultants are here as well, and we have more of the public input, especially from this previous meeting, synthesized. One thing you'll notice on the map is that we are going to show at least 1, if not 2, alternative alignments for NC 54 around the Aviation Parkway intersection. And that primarily is because we know, all indications are at that point that intersection is going to need work. And DOT has stated time and again that they're really going to be looking at moving 54 out of the railroad right-of-way in order to do widening. So we are working closely with DOT and looking at some of these other projects that are coming in to try and of course we'll get public input on it to try and see if we want to show 1 or 2 alternative alignments, and then try and nail down, at least have a better idea for Morrisville residents and for us to know what that may look like in the future. It'll also help us when working through some of these new projects with DOT to be able to point to our adopted plan.
It looks like one of these alignments tears down a bunch of houses that were just built like last year.
No, the furthest north alignment actually follows roughly Cotton Drive. So it just doesn't quite clip them. Okay. Doesn't quite clip them. So that was one thing that we've looked at closely, is trying to minimize impacts to new property as much as possible. Again, because in right away that's going to take a lot more funding to handle. Moving on to the multimodal recommendations. So this is a new map that isn't really in our old plan. It's a combination of things. Essentially since we've added in greenways into the transportation plan, we will now have a multimodal map that'll show all the that'll show future sidewalks, side paths, and greenways all together, as well as the bike facilities, to try and have everything in more of a cohesive map. And hopefully that'll be more user-friendly. So as you can see from this, for the committed and proposed projects, we have about 7 miles of proposed greenway, where we're proposing new neighborhood connectors as part of this transportation plan, and that'll amount to about 1.2 miles. These are connectors that'll connect neighborhoods to primarily greenways. There are several areas where we have neighborhoods that are not far from a greenway but don't have a good connection, and so we want to try and encourage and get those connections created. We have 24 miles of side paths, 6.4 miles of bike lanes, 5.4 miles of shared lane markings, and 3 miles of wide outside lanes. One thing I'm going to note with this, we are going to be changing our terminology with this plan. In our current transportation plan, we use sidewalks, multi-use paths, wide sidewalks. We have different widths for our multi-use paths. It's all a little jumbled. And then if you look at the Parks and Recreation plan, they have greenways, they have multi-use paths, and there's really hadn't been a good standardization of terminology or necessarily even a standardization of design. So that's one thing we'll be doing with this plan is we're going to the AASHTO recommended terminology, which is side paths. Some local towns use it, some don't, but essentially our standard side path will be, I believe, 10 feet, and then we'll have different where we'll have different design standards where we can modify that. So we'll still have some 8-foot wide side paths, but those will not be the standard. Our standard side path will now be 10 feet. And you'll see more of that information as we move towards getting the draft document put together and get that to you. You can see on this map, we again highlighted the committed projects to show where we will have, generally as part of the transportation projects that are being built, we'll have either shared lane markings included or side paths included. And you'll notice on here too, one thing to point out as a committed project is the connection on Davis Drive north of Parkside Valley Drive. That is currently being constructed, and it'll provide a connection from Parkside Valley to the RTP Greenway that runs alongside Davis Drive. And we're very excited about getting that connection in.
Is that a DOT project or?
It's an RTP project, actually.
Yeah, I've just been amazed at seeing like they're spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
The final map you have, and that's up on the screen, is the transit recommendations. For this one, we did at this point primarily focus on really just including what the Wake County Transit Plan shows. We can certainly look at and have discussions about adding additional transit routes in town on our local plan, but just as a starting point, we wanted to just show what the Wake Transit Plan is showing. We did not necessarily indicate stops at this level. This level's really not necessarily the correct level to indicate stops. As far as some of the TOD and commuter rail stops, we will look at those a little bit with this plan, but we'll also follow up with our land use plan. That'll follow up looking again at the TOD and potential areas such as that. And of course, for the buses, the bus stops will be determined as with future studies as we get those routes nailed down. And with that, I'll take a pause here and see if you have any questions or discussion, and then we can move into the exercises.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Craig.
Just comments. I think it's important that this is not performed in a vacuum, and I'm sure among staff you're not doing that, but I just want to make sure that and you can pick and choose what you think is appropriate. I don't think the way to plan transportation is with sticky notes and little round dots. But what you make sure that you have some kind of peer review or benchmarking. I don't know how you would like to do that. Maybe you already do that, Benjamin, just in your conversations and your professional engagements. Let's make sure we do that. Let's make sure we show it to other stakeholders. For example, NCDOT, for example, the railroad, and not so much to say this is what we're going to do, but say this is what we're thinking about doing in case there's no, just in case there's any non-starters there. I think you would know that as well as anyone would, and perhaps that's redundant, but I'll leave that up to your judgment. And finally, there's a lot of talk, not a lot of talk, there is talk about affordable housing. And of course, I don't think we plan a lot of affordable housing, but the thought is that we need some affordable housing. And with that, it's critical to be able to show that we have facilities that will allow affordable housing. And that's just take a lot more time to review this and everything, to ask intelligent questions. And one might say I never ask an intelligent question. But with that being said, I just kind of wanted to put that out there so that the consultants, and I don't even know if that's within their scope or possibly they've had conversations at those levels. I know you deal with individuals of those groups all the time, so I just want to make sure that we do that and make sure that this new strategic plan that the town's about to engage. Let's make sure we're on the same page. We don't want this coming out this year, and then next year something comes out that's different from it. And I think that's maybe Courtney's call to tell you how to do that, but make sure we're on the same page with that.
Thank you, Craig. Esther.
I have one concern as I look at the transit recommendations, and I'm wondering has any consideration been given to adding more transit in terms of, I see the existing routes, but when we look at where the largest portion of our residents live who could probably take advantage of bus transit, I don't see anything in those areas. And with the Wake Tech coming, and not being able to access it directly, we're having to either go all the way around into another county or come all the way down to McCrimnum. I'm thinking bus service on the west side of that purple transit line or commuter rail line. We could use a little bit more. I don't know what you're looking at or if anything else has been considered for that.
As part of our planning effort right now, we haven't really done that because at this point we were just going pretty much along with the Wake Transit plan, and these are the bus routes that are shown as in the Wake Transit plan. I will say one of the opportunities in the Wake Transit plan is what they call a community funding area, where there is funding where the town would be able to get matching funds to have a more town-specific type circulator service. That's probably the only type of service that would run along in that Church Street area that you were talking about and through some of the other areas of town. The reason the red route is on there is because it's a little bit more of a regional to local route, joining in with Cary, but it hits the major areas where park and rides can be located, or the major employment centers. Some degree hits the outskirts of some of the bigger subdivisions, but really to more than likely to get transit service more internal to town, we would need to be looking at that community funding area program, which the Wake Transit groups are just now. There's an engineering study or planning study looking at that that's going to be kicked off here in the next month or so. So in about the next 8 months to a year, we'll know a little bit more about how that community funding program will work. But that is certainly something we can look at with this. Is if the Planning and Zoning Board wants to add some additional bus routes, for future local circulator type service, we can certainly look at that. We can either forward that information on to the consultants, or if the PZB wants to give some, if y'all can give staff some basic guidelines of sort of the type of areas you think would be best served by a circulator such as that, we can certainly look at getting that added onto the map and getting some more input on that.
That's great. I'll keep a note. I'll make a note of that.
Any other comments or questions, Esther?
No, that's one of the key ones that I was looking at. I just think the more we can do with mass transportation, the fewer cars we're going to have. Because traffic, even with the plans that we have, we still are going to have some traffic concerns and issues.
Vinny?
Yep. Two questions. First one on the side paths that you mentioned, AASHTO standards are 10 foot wide.
Yes.
I didn't see any of those in the neighborhood. Can you tell me where are we 10 foot wide side paths? I
don't know if we have any in town that are constructed. Davis Drive has at least 8 foot wide side paths alongside. Our plan has shown and will continue to show 10 foot wide side paths on NC 54. But as far as if they've been constructed anywhere, I don't know that they necessarily have been in town. I think there are some in Cary and some of the surrounding cities.
So are they combination of sidewalk and bike path, or bike path are on top of it?
Side path is essentially a 10-foot wide sidewalk.
And then there will be a bike path in addition to that?
In some areas, we may look at having bike lanes in conjunction with that. Usually, in most of the areas we're looking at, if we're looking at recommending side paths, we probably would not have bike lanes. Because generally, side paths are going to be on the more heavily traveled, heavily congested roads where it may be a little bit too dangerous to have a bike lane on the road. But we certainly are looking at areas. One area, McCrimmon Parkway Extension, for example, we're going to have 8-foot wide side paths and bike lanes on the road itself. So where we do have bike lanes on the road, we'll probably narrow up those side paths. The 10-foot wide side path is really meant to be able to accommodate a broader range of users together. And so if you can remove the bicyclists or some of the bicyclists to a bike lane, then you can narrow up that side path.
So when you are doing the new subdivisions, are you going to require 8 or 10-foot side paths, or it's going to be 4-foot?
It depends on where they are. Our general standard for new subdivision roads, new local roads and subdivisions is just this 5-foot wide sidewalk. Generally, that's all that's really needed. It's the state roads, the bigger roads, where we are looking at requiring the, larger multi-use path side paths, and then in some cases bike lanes in conjunction.
So the second question comes on 54. I heard two things. One is you mentioned that NCDOT is looking into realignment of 54 away from the railroad right away.
Yes.
So are you talking of Evans Road will be the option which will be extended through McCrimmon Parkway as the new 54, or this will be something between railroad and Evans Road?
It would be between the railroad and Evans Road. The relocation would actually only be a few, at most it only would be 100 or 200 feet west of or north of where it is today. So it's not a huge relocation. It's just getting it enough outside of that railroad right of way so that
will start and where will it start?
Well, there's really only a few areas where 54 is in the railroad right of way. The prime area is right around Aviation Parkway, which is why that area is a little bit of a mess today, and why 54, one of the reasons why 54 really hadn't been widened before is the railroad won't let you, of course, widen towards the rails, and they have really pushed to say they don't want any widening within their corridor at all. They want to see the road outside of their corridor. And so that's why we did the NC 54 and more study a couple years ago, and that's the study where DOT and the railroad, really pushed to come up with some alignments to move 54 out of that railroad corridor. But that's really around the Aviation Parkway's only area where it's in the corridor. It gets adjacent to the corridor as you get up close to the Carrington Mill Road area, but it's technically outside the corridor in that location.
And on the 54 widening, I heard from Perimeter Parkway to 540. What about from Cary Parkway all the way to 540?
Right now, there's no funding, and there's no funded projects to widen 54 south of Perimeter Park Drive. That's obviously one of the areas that really needs some widening, and so we're continuing to work with Campo, our regional partner, and NCDOT on, trying to see if we can submit a project through the NCDOT process that could get funded. And so we're continuing to work on that, but as of now, hadn't been a project funded.
So what is the timeline on the Aviation Parkway widening project?
Aviation Parkway is currently in the latest draft STIP document. I believe it is funded for construction beginning somewhere around 2022-2023 timeframe. And it's about a 3-year construction window. It's what they funded it.
That will be from what point? Starting with I-40 all the way to
I-40 all the way back to
54.
NC 54.
And then it will extend to Morrisville Carpenter Road?
Well, the town is widening Morrisville Carpenter Road on the other side of the railroad tracks. So, but the railroad tracks remain to be an area that we can't widen over, and so that's why we're continuing to look at options.
So there will be 4 lanes each way?
Yeah. On each side it'll be 4 lanes, and then ultimately something will be done with that railroad crossing, whether it's a grade separation or moving the intersection away so that you're only looking at straight through movements. Ultimately, it's probably going to be a grade separation because of the fact that we're going to continue to get more trains through there. And so it's going to come to a point where either the crossing gates will stay closed for most of the morning and most of the afternoon, or we need to grade separate. And so we're continuing to look at that. Right now in the draft recommendation map, we do have that intersection indicated as a future grade separation.
Maybe 5 years away or 10 years away?
At this point, it would be, it's not currently funded, so there's no funding for it. So, at more than likely, certainly more than 5 years, more than likely, closer to 10 or maybe even longer than 10. A lot of it will depend on how on if we can get it, if Campo submits it as a project and then into this next prioritization process with NCDOT. That's a 2-year process. It's just now starting. So the first time we may find out if it could get funded would be in 2 years, and then it would be, the funding would be allocated to it after that, probably a number of years after that. So,
what about connecting Airport Boulevard with Davis Drive?
That's one. It's been on our plans for a long time. It's been on the regional plans for a long time. There is no funding for that at this point. Again, parts of that project are going to be very expensive. There are parts that are not going to be expensive. And so we're continuing to look at that. The first step is to get it onto the plan. And the next step that our consultants will be doing and bringing back to you will be looking at some initial prioritization. So they're going to look at some prioritization criteria, developing some of those criteria based on the input we received on the 29th and tonight and from council. And then we'll come back to you with not only the prioritization criteria, we'll also come back to you with a draft prioritization list of these roadway projects that aren't currently committed, giving an idea of, what priority order should they be in, and then when could we potentially get them funded.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have a number of comments and questions all over the map, I'm afraid. I think on a big picture basis, I'm kind of worried that we're just moving in this very linear fashion, that if we've got traffic problem, we have to make the roads wider. If we make the roads wider, they're almost impossible to cross. People exceed the speed limit. You end up slicing and dicing the whole town of Morrisville, north, south, east, and west. So a long-term hope for some of us was that the McCrimmon extension from Evans back to 54 would mean that you'd obviate the need to make 54 through what is currently part of downtown wider. But we don't seem to have thought about those bigger issues. The fact that we're going to make Morrisville Carpenter 4 lanes means it's going to be more difficult for people to get out onto Morrisville Carpenter. I know that because of the experience I have on Davis Drive. When I first moved there eons ago, there was barely any traffic. You could move out very easily. If there was traffic in the morning, they were going so slowly they'd let you in. Now it's 4 lanes. People are doing 55. It's very difficult to get in and out off Davis Drive. The same thing's going to happen on Morrisville Carpenter. The same thing's going to happen on 54. So I'm kind of worried about the big overall picture. Some specifics. I wondered, in your different scenarios, did you take into account the ES50 elementary school on Little Drive? Was that part of your calculation?
For the scenarios, none of our scenarios went that far, or that was not a corridor that was included in our scenario planning. So we really focused the scenario planning on, and partly this was scope and on purpose, was focus it on a limited number of corridors to really look at what the corridors that were the most concerning, and that we've seen the most traffic growth on, and that still have some room for potential development growth that the town can control. Davis Drive is in much of town it's built out. As you get out of town, it's outside of our jurisdiction. So no, we did not specifically look at E50. Obviously that will generate some traffic, but for the most part, the roads in that area are also built out, except for Davis Drive, which ultimately will need to be 6 lanes.
Exactly, yeah. And so you probably didn't look then at Louis Stevens,
No.
the extension of that. Okay. Picking up on something that Esther mentioned, as we go forward, are we going to continue, if we're going to support mass transit, we should look very seriously at where bus stops should be. And we've had a lot of pushback in the past from developers, for example, in Park West Village, who didn't want a bus stop in Park West. And I think that's something that we should consider, maybe changing our ordinances or really making provision for that going forward.
We do have that in our ordinance now. And we've been successful with some recent development.
Interesting audio issue going on here.
What?
There's an audio issue going on. Well, whatever.
Morse code.
It's the ghost of transportation plans past trying to speak to us.
Speaking of which, it's very interesting to see the realignment of 54 at Aviation coming back. It was very prominent 12 years ago and was closed down flat. So you never know, it might come back. Craig mentioned talking to other stakeholders. Have we discussed this with the town of Cary, or is that part of the ongoing CAMPO involvement? Or
We haven't had necessarily direct discussions with Town Cary, but we have kept up with them, talked to them about what their plan shows, especially on some of the roads where they run through both of the jurisdictions. And actually, the Cary staff did come to the June 29th meeting to see what we were doing. For the most part, our plans are meshing up pretty well. One area is 54. Their plan does still show 6 lanes, but their council has also made the decision and is pushing to keep it 4 lanes as long as possible. Our plan, for the most part, shows 54 keeping it 4 lanes through most of the town. As you get closer to Cary Parkway, there may be a need for more lanes in the future, but at the same time, there's not any room for more lanes down there. So that's something that we'll continue to look at. But as far as from a plan perspective, we did look at that at our edges and try and make sure that as much as possible, our recommendations on roads that go at our edges and into other municipalities are if possible, matching their recommendations, or if we need to have different recommendations, why that is.
Well, again, going back to sort of Davis Drive, rather than have that 6 lanes, it seems much better to me to extend Louis Stevens. That way you have an alternative route right into RTP, right behind Cisco. Fabulous.
And Lewis Stevens Road is, it is being extended, and it is ultimately still going to be shown as a 4-lane road, because that's what the modeling has shown us. But the model includes that, and it's still saying Davis Drive is going to need 6 lanes. So it is a balance. We certainly could, we could make the policy choice to not, to have Davis Drive, show Davis Drive in our plans as only ever being 4 lanes. What that could do is limit potential ability to have right-of-way dedicated as the few remaining parcels are developed along Davis Drive. And again, Davis Drive being a state road, the state can still come in and say we need to be 6 lanes. So it is a balance of, trying to get traffic moved through town while still trying to maintain a context-sensitive design. And that's what we are trying to do with this plan. We have, if you notice, especially if you look at the current plan versus what the current 2009 plan versus this, the future roadway map does look significantly different. We did look closely at where, the current plan recommends some new roads, and we looked at those and tried to determine are they feasible? Are they really needed? And where we could, we took them off where it didn't make sense. The other thing that we haven't really gotten to yet is cross sections. And that'll be one of the next things that we bring back to you is some recommended cross sections, which will hopefully address some of your concerns. Granted, with the base concern of continuing to widen roads versus doing other things, there's only so much you can do. But as far as cross sections go, we are trying to really look at minimizing those where possible and making sure that we have, good amenities, pedestrian crossings, pedestrian facilities, bike facilities to try and really make our roads multimodal as much as possible.
Very good. Thank you. One last thing. You now totally confused me about sidewalks and side paths. If it's a sidewalk, people can walk on it. But then you think there's a 10-foot side path that can have bicycles, and there's an 8-foot side path that maybe does not have bicycles. And
it does get a little confusing. So what you'll be seeing moving forward, sidewalk will be the basic 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk adjacent to a road. That's that's the standard. If you're going to just build a 2-lane road, you have to build a sidewalk with it. For standard. Where in areas where there's some major destination points that we know there's going to be there needs to be some multimodal considerations, that's where you'll start to see side paths. Our current plan has a lot of, it goes back and forth depending on which road you look at as to whether it's a 8-foot wide multi-use path, a 10-foot wide multi-use path, a 10-foot wide sidewalk. And so we're trying to normalize the terminology as far as the different widths. The 10-foot wide width is believed to be adequate enough to have bike and pedestrian traffic coexist, because essentially you're allotting 5 feet to the pedestrians, 5 feet to the bikes. 8 feet wide, it's getting a little tight for the bikes and the pedestrians to coexist, and that's why if you're going to have an 8-foot wide side path, you probably are going to want to look at some sort of on-road bike facilities as well to try and get some of those more advanced bikers onto that road. Whereas a 10-foot wide path, it's not the best situation, but essentially you could have some of the more advanced bikers still be able to keep some speed on 10-foot wide path and not have to worry about pedestrians as much because you have that wider area. So.
Right. Well, one last thing on that. The 8-foot sidewalk, as I think it was called, in Breckenridge many years ago, some of the early feedback I remember was how popular that was because you could get 2 strollers side by side or they could pass. So don't forget that sort of traffic as well.
I was just going to add from the 10-foot path. The biggest conflict for bicycles is at the intersections, right, and people making right turns. So that's important to have a facility that they can actually leave the roadway and come to an intersection, so that a right turn car or a car at a roundabout or those other kind of intersections, you could have a facility there. So it helps designers have a place for bicycles to ride through an intersection without interrupting the flow of traffic at that intersection and causing another disruption and more queuing problems through the intersection. I think that's another feature that's important to think about. And if you go out west, Portland or Seattle even, but mostly they've done a lot of that kind of thing. It's simply changing the use due to different items there. So, yeah.
So talking about that, I can't remember. I know they've gone back and forth on what sort of the best practice is. So is the best practice believed now to have the bikes separated at the intersections, or is the best? I thought it was to have them in the roadway so that you didn't have that side conflict.
I think it probably depends somewhat on who you talk to and somewhat on the road itself. On the I think and two, it comes to somewhat of the intersection design. If you have a tighter radius intersection where cars have to slow down that much more to be able to make the corner, it may not be as big a deal to have bikes in the road. But if you have a wider road and a wider radius where cars can fly around that corner, it may be better to separate those bikes and give them the opportunity to stop. So it really, I think, varies.
Kerry and Raleigh just spent a lot of time and money painting sharrows all over the road, and they're not doing separation. They're keeping them in the road and sort of saying, hey, bikes can be here. It wouldn't be probably the great idea for us to be like totally different than every other.
Right, and that's where we are. I mean, we are trying to catch up and get, have similar recommendations to what our surrounding areas are, and look at, one of the things we had our consultants do is look at the best practices, which is why they looked at the AASHTO, which is a Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, and looked at some of the other information that's out there, the NACTO Urban, I think it's the Green Book or whatever, and some of those standards that are out there in areas. So one of the things that we are doing with this plan is I believe if you look, you'll see we're actually probably going to have try and use the sharrows more often and have those, as more recommendations. Those are great on roads that are 35 miles per hour or less. The standard from the manual and uniform traffic control devices is once you get to about 45, you really shouldn't have them. 45 is about the limit, and that can be a questionable installation, although I know Kerry has put them on some 45 mile per hour roads, although I don't see them used very often. But with Morrisville Carbon Road, for example, we will be putting sharrows on the outside lanes. And so that's another effort to try and say, hey, bikes are allowed here, and hopefully try and get some of that traffic calmed so that we don't have traffic flying through town at 50, 60 miles per hour.
I think you're right in the sense of it depends on where you want to put it, what the current design is, and what Kerry's done is a lot of road diets, and that's where they've come up with a lot of that. And
one other thing we'll be looking at, it may or may not come out of the plan. It'll probably be a recommendation, a final sort of implementation step in the plan, but I know it's been brought up by several different people, including some council members, is looking at some of the newer signs that you've seen around Apex and Cary with the new style share the road signs where it says, bikes, they have the signs that say you must have 4 foot separation from bikes, and there's a couple different styles I know Apex has used, so we'll also be looking at some of those too for recommendations for implementing some of those on some of the roads to try and again encourage that bicycle safety and make it clear that we do want our roads to be as multimodal as possible.
And they're trendy. All planners are trendy. You're about planners, you're all trendy. But J-turns, 2 years ago you wouldn't have a J-turn. Now DOT's put them all over the place, and they kind of go through these trends of planning and what's the latest and greatest, and they did that in San Francisco, so we're going to do it over here, and they go to a conference and see it and come back, we're going to put that here, and so I think that's a lot of it too.
Well, that's good.
All right. Are y'all ready for a couple quick exercises?
I think so.
Okay. The first one is the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper in the paperclip section. You'll see there are 2 little dots that should be in that, a blue and a yellow dot that should be paperclipped somewhere in that packet too. And you'll see on the dots they're numbered 1 and 2. So for this one, this is getting to our prioritization criteria that we're going to be looking at. And so if you will put your, as the instructions say, put your yellow or number 1 dot next to what you think is the top prioritization criteria listed, and put the blue number 2 dot next to the prioritization criteria that you would rank number 2.
Will I mess up your statistics if I did this on June the 29th already?
That's perfectly all right. The more we have, the better. We're not keeping track of who does what.
So vote early and vote often, right?
What?
Vote early and vote often.
Yeah.
Clarification. Existing congestion and congestion reduction, how are those two different?
What are we doing?
So, and that came up before. I'm trying to remember how we talked about that. One is so for the prioritization criteria, existing congestion would be the road's already. It would be. Do you want to look at how congested the road is? It's looking at how congested the road is now, and then congestion reduction would be, do you want to prioritize things that would reduce the congestion, or do you want to, so when you're looking at a road and trying to prioritize it, is it more important to you if the road is congested now, looking purely at the level of existing congestion, or is it more important to look at the level of congestion reduction, if that makes sense? That was one. Those were two that I know we had a lot of discussion about, and we ended up not really coming up with a better way to introduce those. But that's where we did put if you look, the applicable guiding principles are a little bit different on those.
So can you explain again? There are 5 cards we have.
Yeah, we'll get to the next one.
So
we'll get
where
to
are we
those.
putting these dots?
The dots are just for the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that says project prioritization. And I'll explain what to do with the 5 cards in a moment.
Project prioritization.
This one?
Yep.
Okay.
And you just stick the dots under the rating column.
Okay, I got you.
So what? Yeah, I think you already asked that question. You say prioritization, existing congestion versus congestion reduction. What exactly?
So again, from a criteria standpoint, it's what is the more important criteria for you? Is it that the road is it just looking at the existing congestion on the road if you're scoring, if you're doing a scoring methodology to determine which road needs improvements more than another, is it more important to you to look at the level of existing congestion, or is it more important for you to look at, for a given improvement, how much that will reduce the congestion? All right.
Done.
Okay. Are we ready to move on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So next up is those 5 half sheets of paper, and those are relating to our key corridors. And again, you don't have to use all 5. But I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to do it for each of the corridors, you can, or if you just want to pick 1 or 2. But for each sheet of paper, you pick a corridor. So you check, one of the boxes on the left, and then we just want you to list your 3 highest priorities for that corridor. Unfortunately, I don't have the color dots for you on this one, so if you can just write in each of the part of the triangle, safety, congestion, appearance, walk, bike, or transit. Just write in what your 3 highest priorities are.
do we have to put our name or no?
No, you don't have to put your name in. If you'll just leave them at your spot, we'll get them at the end of the meeting. And that's it for my presentation. So I think we'll move on with the meeting here, but we'll stick around for a few minutes after the meeting if you need a little bit more time. The one other thing that provides you at your seat was the comment cards that we provided to the public at the June 29th open house. You don't have to fill those out, but I wanted to give you the opportunity. If you want to fill out, there's space for general comments and then a space for, I believe, what your highest transportation priority or the corridor that you're most concerned about, that you can write in on that card. So you can also, if you don't have time or don't want to do that tonight, you can also look at that and feel free to email me comments over the next few days, and I'll make sure to get those over to our consultants as well to put together with the public comments and the town council work. So, thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. And I'd just like to comment how great it is these days to have someone who is a transportation planner on staff who is cooperating with all these other entities. If only you'd been around 20 years ago, but we're glad you're here now. Thank you. So, Courtney?
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is another School of Government training, very similar to the one that we took a couple of months ago on the different types of approvals that a government body has, the legislative, the administrative, the judicial. Well, this one's on adopting and amending the ordinance. Again, it's about 30 minutes. Presentation. They tend to have Q&As in them. So we're going to go ahead and get the presentation started. If you have any general questions all along the way, I'm really happy to answer them if I'm ready.
Welcome to this module on amending local development regulations. My name is David Owen, and I'm a professor at the School of Government at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. To navigate through this module, you can use the left-hand navigation or the play bar that appears below. This module was made possible by the general support of the Risk Management Division of the North Carolina League of Municipalities. This is one in a series of modules on land development regulation. You can review a complete list of the modules available by clicking on the link on the slide. This module reviews how local government boards adopt, amend, and repeal development regulations, with a particular focus on amending the zoning ordinance. While we will focus on amendments, all of the legal requirements we will review also apply to the initial adoption and to the repeal of a development regulation. After completing this module, you will understand how ordinance amendments are initiated, the role of the planning board in review of proposed amendments, requirements for advertising and conducting public hearings, factors that can and cannot be considered for decisions, and voting requirements for governing boards making these decisions. Let's use a typical rezoning case to illustrate the points we'll cover in this module. Here's the case we'll use. Meet Melanie, a local real estate developer. She has recently acquired a 10-acre tract in Normalton. The lot is vacant. Most of the land around the tract is occupied by single-family homes. However, one side of the property is bounded by Main Street, a major city street. Melanie's parcel is a mile or so out from downtown, but the street has a fair amount of commercial development between this lot and downtown. Melanie thinks her property is ideally suited for commercial development. She would like to build a large grocery store, along with space for several smaller businesses, such as restaurants, banks, and perhaps a service station. The site, like most of the surrounding land, has long been zoned R15, a single-family residential district. In order to build her project, the site would need to be rezoned to B3, Normanton's General Commercial Zoning District. So Melanie has submitted the paperwork to rezone the site from R15 to B3. What rules control how the city processes Melanie's proposal to amend the Normanton zoning ordinance? What roles do Melanie, the neighbors, the city staff, the planning board, and the city council play? How is the council's action on a rezoning different from a decision on a special use permit? In addition to these general considerations, in this module, we'll address a couple of specific questions about zoning amendments. What steps in the process are mandatory under state law? What factors should the decision makers take into account? And what factors would be improper? What happens if a council member is biased or the decision would affect a member's personal finances? Give these questions some thought as we proceed, and we'll answer them before we finish. On initial questions, who can initiate a proposal to amend a zoning ordinance or other local development regulation? The general answer is that anyone can petition the government to amend its laws, including the zoning map. As a practical matter, many amendments are initiated by the local government itself. The local government staff, the planning board, or even the governing board may start the process to consider an amendment. Most rezoning petitions are initiated by a landowner seeking to change the range of uses permitted on the property. Other interested parties, such as the real estate community or neighborhood groups, may also propose amendments. For the most part, state law only addresses the process that must be followed in considering a proposed amendment, rather than specify how the process can be started. It is permissible for a local government to require that proposals to rezone property or otherwise amend the ordinance be made on forms provided by the city or county. These forms assure that basic information about the proposal is available from the very outset of the process. It is also permissible to charge an application fee. The fee must be no higher than a reasonable estimate of the administrative cost to process the application. For example, the local government can consider the cost that will be incurred in advertising and conducting a public hearing, or in securing needed technical analysis of the proposal, and can set an appropriate fee to offset those costs. Once a complete application is in hand and any required processing fees have been paid, the local government starts the process to review the proposed amendment. The local government staff usually prepares a report analyzing the proposal and schedules moving the proposal through the review process. An initial step in the mandatory procedures that must be followed is a review by the planning board. State law requires that cities and counties submit all proposed zoning text and map amendments to the planning board for review. The planning board must be given up to 30 days for this review, but they can report on a recommendation earlier than this. If no recommendation is made within 30 days of referral to the planning board, the governing board is then free to proceed without a recommendation. Planning board review of other development regulations may be required by local ordinance, but it is mandated by the state only for zoning amendments. There is no state requirement for a public hearing by the planning board. Some local ordinances require a formal hearing before the planning board, or a joint public hearing before the Planning Board and Governing Board. But it is more common for the Planning Board to receive public comments informally during a regular meeting of the Planning Board rather than holding a formal hearing. The typical process at the Planning Board meeting starts with the staff briefly summarizing the proposal and the applicant explaining why they are seeking the amendment. The staff reports on their analysis and may offer a recommendation. Members of the public who wish to comment are generally allowed to do so. Then the Planning Board members discuss the matter and vote on a recommendation to the Governing Board. There are a couple of legal requirements about the Planning Board review that must be met. First, the Planning Board must make a written comment to the Governing Board. The written statement must be presented to the Governing Board prior to the Governing Board vote on the matter. So including the statement only in Planning Board minutes that are prepared and approved after the Governing Board meeting is insufficient. The written statement from the Planning Board must be before the Governing Board at the time that board acts on the matter. Second, the Planning Board statement must address plan consistency. The Planning Board must identify all adopted plans that are relevant and let the Governing Board know whether the proposal is consistent with those plans. Some states require that zoning amendments be consistent with the plan. That is not required in North Carolina. But the Planning Board and the Governing Board are both required to consider the plan and explain in writing whether the amendment is or is not consistent with the plans. The plan consistency statement does not have to be long and exhaustive, but it must be more than a simple checkoff. It must describe how the proposal is consistent or not. The statement may also address other matters deemed important by the Planning Board. For example, since the Governing Board has to address whether the amendment is reasonable and in the public interest, the Planning Board can identify and discuss factors that will help make those determinations. There is no requirement for a positive recommendation for the Planning Board in order for the potential amendment to move forward. The Planning Board recommendation is advisory only. The only legal requirements are that the statement be in writing, that it be presented to the Governing Board before they act, and that it address plan consistency. Let's take a look at how these requirements played out with Melanie's rezoning request. The Planning Board discussed the proposal at a regular scheduled meeting. Melanie, her planner and traffic consultant, the city staff, and 4 neighbors presented comments. The board concluded that some of the policies in the Normalton Comprehensive Plan supported the project. Policies encouraging more dense developments to be located along major roads, and those supporting increased commercial development within town. Other policies tended to point the other way. Policies on maintaining the residential character of established neighborhoods and limiting the traffic impacts of new development. The board decided to pass that analysis along to the City Council without resolving whether the project would or would not be consistent with the plan. A majority of the Planning Board then voted to recommend denial of the rezoning, based primarily on neighborhood opposition. Since the planner was leaving town the next day for a much-needed vacation and would not be around to write up the Planning Board action prior to the council meeting, the Planning Board chair volunteered to go to the council meeting and present the board's recommendation. Which of the following statements about the Planning Board review of Melanie's rezoning request is true? 1. The analysis of plan consistency is inadequate because a description of how plan policies are implicated is insufficient. The board must come to a yes or no conclusion on plan consistency. 2. The City Council must deny the rezoning based on the Planning Board's recommendation for denial. 3. An oral report on Planning Board review is inadequate. The board's analysis and recommendation must be in writing when presented to the City Council. On the next slide, you'll be asked a question regarding this rezoning request, and when you submit your answer by clicking the Submit button, you will receive feedback. When you are ready to move to start the quiz, select the Continue button on the slide.
Okay, so which of the following statements about the planning board's review of Melanie's rezoning request is true? A, the analysis of plan consistency is inadequate because the description of how plan policies are implemented is insufficient. The board must come to a yes or no conclusion on plan consistency. B, the city council must deny the rezoning based off the planning board's recommendation for denial. C, the oral report on the planning board review is inadequate. The board's analysis and recommendation must be written when presented to city council.
Going to hold a vote.
It's definitely C. It's just is A in there as well.
So which one do y'all think is true?
Does it have to be one?
Thinking this is probably so.
Yes. I think it's C, but
Yep. I think it's A.
So which one are we going with?
C.
The first two statements, A and B, are incorrect. An analysis of how the rezoning would meet some plan policies but not others is sufficient for the plan consistency statement. The council must have and consider the planning board recommendation, but it is not bound by that recommendation. Thus, the correct answer is C. An oral report is not sufficient, as the planning board comment must be put in writing and delivered to the council. This comment must address plan consistency.
You may continue with the module by selecting Continue on your screen. If you would like to review your answers, you may do so by first selecting the Review Quiz button and then selecting the Next Slide button on your play bar to continue with the module. A vital part of the development regulation amendment process is the public hearing. Other means of securing public comment are certainly allowed, but a formal hearing is mandated by the statutes. State law also mandates specific notice of the public hearing that must be held for legislative decisions to adopt, amend, or repeal a local development regulation. A local ordinance can add additional notice requirements, but it must at a minimum meet these state requirements. State law mandates that an advertisement for the hearing must be published twice in separate weeks, with the first notice at least 10 but not more than 25 days prior to the hearing. This published notice must appear in a newspaper of general circulation. Putting the notice in an advertising circular or a homeowner's newsletter is not sufficient. The published hearing notice is required for all proposed amendments to any local development regulation, rezonings, and amendments to the text of any development regulation. A couple of additional hearing notice requirements are necessary for proposed zoning map amendments. For zoning map amendments, a notice of the hearing must be mailed to the owners of the affected and the abutting properties. The notice must be mailed to whoever is identified by the county tax records as owners of the property being rezoned and all property that abuts or touches the property. An updated title search to determine whether the property has changed hands since the tax listing is not required. This mail notice must be sent first class. It does not have to be sent by return receipt mail, though local governments may do so in order to get an official record of delivery. A city or county may require someone proposing a rezoning to compile the list of owners who get this mail notice, although the staff usually does the actual mailing. Some local ordinances require the mail notice to be sent to all properties within a set distance of the property proposed to be rezoned, typically properties within 100 or 500 feet. An ordinance can require mailing the notice to more property owners than is required by the state statutes, but not to fewer owners. If an expanded mailing requirement is placed in an ordinance, it is binding and must be followed. The city or county staff should maintain a copy of the notice that is mailed, a list of the recipients, and a certification by the person making the mailing as to when it was done. The mailing is conclusively presumed to be valid if that certification is made unless there is a showing of fraud. If a proposed rezoning or a zoning text amendment changes permitted land use on property within 5 miles of a military base, the hearing notice must be sent by certified mail to the base commander. Other means of delivery that will provide actual notice to the base commander may be used, but documentation of receipt of the notice is important. This notice to the base commander must also be made when reviewing text amendments relative to telecommunication towers or windmills, or a provision for a new major subdivision or substantial enlargement of existing subdivision within 5 miles of the base. Local governments have an alternative to mail notice for larger rezonings. If a rezoning covers more than 50 properties with 50 different owners, local governments have the option of substituting 2 half-page newspaper ads for the mail notice. If this alternative is used, a mailing must still be made to property owners who live outside the newspaper's area of circulation. On-site posting of a hearing notice is also required for all zoning map amendments. Each local government has discretion as to the number and size of the signs that are used and on the timing of the mandatory posting, so long as the posting provides reasonable notice to interested persons. The statutes do not mandate the content of the sign. Wording such as zoning hearing notice or public hearing is sufficient. Most signs include contact information, such as a phone number for the city or county planning office, to obtain details about the hearing or the proposed action. If multiple parcels are proposed for rezoning, it is not necessary to post each parcel, but sufficient notices must be posted to give reasonable notice of the proposed action. If a rezoning is initiated by someone other than the owner of the property affected or the local government, the landowner must be provided actual notice of the hearing. This notice can be accomplished by personal delivery or by a mailing that verifies receipt. The content of the published and mailed notice should include a brief description of the subject of the hearing, the date, time, and location of the hearing, and a contact source for more detailed information. Many notices also advise that changes to the proposed amendment may be made in response to comments received. The full text of an amendment does not need to be included, but the explanation should have enough detail to allow an interested person to understand the nature of the proposal. The general rule of thumb is to put sufficient detail in the notice to let an average citizen know enough about what is being proposed to decide whether or not to attend the hearing, submit comments, or to seek more information. For example, it would be sufficient in our case if the notice said the purpose of the hearing is to receive comments about a proposal to rezone the property at 1521 Main Street from single-family residential zoning to commercial zoning. Okay, consider this situation as it applies to Melanie's rezoning request. A notice of the City Council hearing was published in the Normalton Gazette 2 weeks before the hearing and again the week before the hearing. A sign about the hearing was put on the site 2 weeks before the hearing. However, due to a clerical mix-up in the planning office, notices of the hearing were not mailed to the neighboring property owners until 4 days prior to the hearing. On the next slide, you'll see 3 statements and select the one that is true. Once you have selected the correct answer, click the Submit button to receive feedback. When you're ready to move to start the quiz, select the Continue button on the slide.
Okay, so which of the following statements are true about the hearing? Which following statements about the hearing notice are true? So is it A, since a sign was posted on site in a timely manner, mailed notice is redundant and not essential? B, if the mailed notices are actually delivered before the hearing, the fact that they were mailed late is a harmless error. C, since the notices were not mailed at least 10 days prior to the hearing, the mailed notice is inadequate, and any action that the City Council takes is subject to being invalidated if challenged in court.
C.
1C. Do I
C.
hear another C?
I'll agree with C.
C.
The correct answer is C. All of the various notice requirements must be strictly met. The statutes require that the mailed notice be deposited at the post office at least 10, but not more than 25 days prior to the hearing. The fact that some or even all of the neighbors may have actually gotten notice does not excuse a failure to meet the statutory notice requirements.
You may continue. The night of the hearing on Melanie's application to rezone the Main Street parcel has arrived. Melanie is ready to tell the council why they should approve her request. A room full of neighbors are present and ready to tell the council why Melanie's proposal would have a terrible impact on them. While some rezonings are routine and non-controversial, rezonings are often one of the most visible and hotly debated issues that come before city councils and county boards of commissioners. The decisions have a significant impact on the landowner, the neighbors, and the future of the community. There are often large financial stakes involved, and emotions can run high. What rules apply to how the governing board conducts these hearings? The key factor here is that public hearings on a rezoning and for all text amendments is legislative. The purpose of the hearing is to let members of the public tell the governing board why this would be good or bad. Giving citizen advice and opinions about the matter is the whole reason for the hearing. There may be numerous technical issues to consider, but ultimately rezoning is a policy choice to be made by elected officials who have to decide what is best for the landowner, the neighbors, the public, and the future of the city or county. These legislative hearings are very different from an evidentiary hearing and a quasi-judicial case. In those cases, special use permits, variances, appeals, the purpose of the hearing is to gather competent material evidence as to whether standards in the ordinance have been met. The rules for evidentiary hearing, such as witnesses under oath, limits on opinion testimony, and gathering evidence outside of the hearing, are discussed in detail in the module on evidentiary hearings. On the other hand, with legislative hearings, speakers need not be under oath, and they are free to express opinions about the wisdom of the proposed action. That is not to say that no rules can be applied to public comments at legislative hearings. Unduly repetitious or irrelevant comments can be barred. Reasonable time limits can be imposed. For example, each speaker can be limited to a set time, such as 5 or 10 minutes each. Each side could be given a set time to present their case, or total length could be set for the hearing. It is acceptable to allow only a single person to speak to represent a group with similar concerns, with perhaps a showing of hands by all those who agree. It is appropriate to have sign-up sheets to manage participation. While public hearing rules of this type are common and legally acceptable, care should be taken to conduct an essentially fair hearing. For example, the local government should not allow the rules to be manipulated to permit one side in a contested rezoning to monopolize the entire hearing without giving the other side a reasonable opportunity to comment. Once the City Council has considered Melanie's application, the staff analysis, the Planning Board recommendations, and public comments, they deliberate and make a decision. What factors can the Council consider in reaching a decision? For the most part, the decision on how a particular property should be zoned and the substance of development regulations is left to the good judgment and discretion of elected officials. There are statutory and constitutional protections for a few particular land uses. These will be discussed in future modules. But for the most part, the decision is within the discretion of the governing board. If local residents conclude the elected officials are making bad zoning ordinance decisions, the remedy is usually at the ballot box rather than at the courthouse. There are nonetheless some general guidelines on legitimate and illegitimate factors when considering any development regulation amendment. The primary consideration when reviewing a potential amendment to a development regulation is the potential future land use impact on the landowner, the neighbors, and the public. Factors such as the suitability of the site for the proposed uses, impacts on traffic, utility availability, impacts on the environment or neighborhood character, and on school capacity are all legitimate considerations. Will there be adequate public infrastructure to support the development that would be allowed? Would the development unduly harm neighboring property values or otherwise adversely affect the surrounding neighborhood? What sort of fiscal impact would this have for the local government? What sort of precedent or pattern would this set? Would this advance the goals and policies set in the comprehensive plan? All of these are fair questions and legitimate questions to ask when considering a rezoning. There are several factors that may not be a part of these decisions. These include the race, ethnicity, religion, income, or character of residents of the proposed project. Factors unrelated to land use impacts are also off limits. For example, our courts have held that whether a residence will be owner-occupied or occupied by renters is not a legitimate zoning consideration. The land use impacts of permitting multifamily development can certainly be considered, but whether the building is an owner-occupied condominium or a renter-occupied apartment building is irrelevant for zoning purposes. Unlike quasi-judicial decisions, no written findings of fact are required for ordinance adoption, repeal, or amendments. There is no requirement for substantial evidence to support the decision because these are policy choices for elected officials. However, the governing board must approve a written statement on each zoning amendment decision that addresses plan consistency and how the decision is reasonable and in the public interest. The substance of the governing board statement is not subject to judicial review, but its existence and whether it includes a description and explanation is subject to judicial review. Having a written statement from the staff or planning board in the record before the governing board is not sufficient unless the governing board affirmatively approves the statement. A checklist or conclusory statement that the amendment is consistent with the plan and is reasonable is also insufficient. If the rezoning involved is a spot zoning or conditional zoning, the documentation that there's a reasonable basis for the decision is all the more important. Additional information about spot zoning and conditional zoning is included in future modules. Consider this. Melanie has submitted detailed traffic engineering reports that show how the traffic expected to be generated by her project will be handled. These reports show that if left turn lanes are added at entrances to the site, the existing city streets can handle the additional traffic. The city traffic staff has submitted a report concurring with this analysis. However, a large number of neighbors spoke at the hearing about their belief that the project would lead to adverse traffic impacts on their neighborhood. While offering their concerns, the neighbors had no expert analysis to offer. If the City Council agrees with the neighbors, can it deny Melanie's rezoning request because of adverse traffic impacts? On the next slide, you'll be able to select the correct answer, then click the Submit button to receive feedback. When you're ready to move to start the quiz, select the Continue button on the slide.
Okay, so if the city council agrees with the neighbors, can it deny Melanie's rezoning request because of adverse traffic impacts? Yes?
No.
Yes.
No.
Okay, so I heard 2 yeses, I think, and 1 no.
I'm saying no.
2, so I think we're at 2 no's, 2 yeses, and a silent. You are the deciding vote. Which way are we ready to go here?
I'm going to go with yes because it's a legislative decision.
So is the chair taking the lead here? We'll find out. Is the chair correct?
Probably not.
Yes.
The correct answer is yes. If this were a quasi-judicial special use permit, reliable evidence would be necessary in the hearing record to support the finding that the project is unsafe due to traffic problems. However, with a legislative decision, the council may consider citizens' opinions about the desirability and wisdom of the proposed amendment. Expert testimony is not required to support the council's discretionary decision on a rezoning.
So before I hit continue, I want to go back to a rezoning case that y'all recently saw. And if you remember, you forwarded a recommendation of denial, and you stated that while it wasn't consistent with adopted in plans, it was not reasonable in the public interest, and you gave 3 reasons for that. Transportation was one of those 3 reasons. So what the framework of your recommendation was appropriate following these guidelines and statute regulations?
You may continue. There are 2 additional factors that need to be addressed before the governing board votes on Melanie's rezoning request. The first is determining how many votes are required to adopt the amendment, and the second is determining which members are eligible to vote. The general rule is that any amendment to a development regulation can be adopted by a majority of the governing board. There is an important exception to this rule for zoning map amendments. State law mandates the availability of protest petitions for cities. Protest petitions are not available with county zoning. So what is a zoning protest petition?
Now, is that something they did away with?
So,
I think since this was done, yeah.
Yeah, they no longer allow protest petitions. So I'm going to skip through some here. Unless that's what they're going to talk
When
about.
zoning was first authorized by states in the 1920s, some thought was given to allowing landowners to veto any future changes in the zoning of their property. It was concluded that this would be an unlawful delegation of legislative power. So an alternative was developed to protect the interests of those landowners who rely on the existing zoning. The solution was to create a process where if a sufficient number of those who would be most directly affected by a change objected to the amendment, a supermajority of the city council was necessary to change the zoning of the property. A qualified protest petition triggers a requirement that a rezoning must be adopted.
Because we lost our ability to do this. I'll save y'all 2 minutes.
A second important factor about voting on an amendment to a development regulation is avoiding improper conflicts of interest. It is important to remember that these are legislative decisions, and elected officials generally have an obligation to vote on every case. Unlike a quasi-judicial decision, governing board members do not need to be impartial. They may discuss pending cases outside the hearing, and they may hold firm personal opinions about the desired outcome. But if a decision would have a direct, substantial, readily identifiable financial impact on a member, that member must not vote on the legislative zoning decision. This rule applies both to the City Council and the Planning Board. The member may participate in the discussion, but may not vote. Some local ordinances prohibit members with a financial interest in the outcome from participating even in the discussion of the case, which may well be a good practice, but it is not mandated by state law. Consider this. Matt Jones is a member of the Normalton City Council. He lives in the neighborhood adjacent to Melanie's proposed development, but on the opposite end of the neighborhood. His house is about 10 blocks from Melanie's property. He is a former president of the neighborhood association and ran for city council as a vigorous neighborhood advocate. Matt attended a neighborhood meeting the week before the rezoning hearing, where there was extensive discussion of the proposed rezoning. Matt's wife signed a petition opposing the rezoning. The day before the hearing, Matt told a reporter for the Normalton Gazette that he'd been elected to the city council precisely to stop the sort of travesty being proposed by Melanie. Is Matt allowed to vote on this matter? On the next slide, you'll be able to select the correct answer, then click the Submit button to receive feedback. When you're ready to start the quiz, select the Continue button on the slide.
Okay, so which of the following statements is true? He is not allowed to vote due to his discussion on the matter outside the hearing. Or B, he is not allowed to vote due to his close association with a group opposing the rezoning and an immediate family member who has opposed the rezoning. C, he is not allowed to vote because he has expressed a conclusion about the outcome prior to the hearing. Or D, he must vote unless the rezoning would have a substantial impact on his property value, which is unlikely given the distance of his home from this site.
D.
Yeah, I go with D. Mainly because Lee's been right.
I see 3 Ds. How about my 2 holdouts on the end over there? What do y'all think it is? Yeah, the 2 of you on the very far left.
I said D.
You say D?
Yeah.
Okay, it's unanimous. D.
The correct answer is D. If this were a quasi-judicial matter, the discussion outside of the hearing, ties to those opposing the project, and having a bias could disqualify her from participation. However, with a legislative decision such as a rezoning, impartiality is not required. Thus, she is required to vote unless there is a financial conflict of interest.
You may continue with another key difference between legislative and quasi-judicial decisions is whether they may be reconsidered. When a final quasi-judicial decision is made, it is binding and the board has no jurisdiction to rehear the same case. There must be some material change in the application, the ordinance, or conditions on the site in order to bring it up again. By contrast, there is no statutory or constitutional limit on reconsideration of a legislative zoning decision. This raises the prospect of a disappointed applicant for a rezoning bringing the same case back to the city or county time after time. This could place a real burden on the neighbors, staff, and local boards having to review the same project multiple times. To prevent that inefficiency, Many local ordinances provide that once a decision is made on a rezoning proposal, no other zoning petitions affecting that property can be considered for a specified time. The time limit varies, but is often 6 months or a year. Each ordinance specifies what triggers a waiting period. It may be a hearing on a rezoning for that parcel, defeat of a rezoning, or some other defined point in the zoning amendment process. While a waiting period is not mandated by state law, if a waiting period is placed in the zoning ordinance, it is binding and it must be observed. Legislative regulatory decisions have a significant impact on property owners, neighbors, the community, and local governments. State statutes give great discretion to each city and county to determine what regulations are best for their own situation. But state law sets detailed, mandatory procedures that must be followed to assure that all of those affected by these decisions are aware of proposed amendments and have the opportunity to make their views known prior to the decision. A review by the planning board is mandated to help produce decisions that are carefully and thoughtfully considered. Public hearings on a proposed amendment are required and they must be fair. But the hearing is an opportunity to offer comments and suggestions, not the presentation of testimony like a court proceeding. Amendments are adopted or rejected by simple majority vote of the governing board. The exception is where there is a valid protest petition for a city rezoning, which triggers a 3/4 majority vote requirement.
Ignore that bullet.
Planning board and governing board members are not allowed to vote on matters that are likely to have substantial financial impact on the member. These requirements are intended to establish a consistent, open, and fair process. Carefully following them is not only a legal requirement, but helps ensure public confidence in the integrity of the process. You can find more information on land use planning and development regulation at the link that appears on your screen. Please contact me using the information on the screen.
Okay, well, hopefully you enjoyed another session. I would pretty much say y'all appear to be planning geniuses since you got every single one correct. There's only a few little outliers and some letters that were tossed out there, so quite impressive. And I have to admit, too, you're much easier to teach than I taught college students, so thank you. It's not a job I'd ever want to get.
I have a quick question for you, Courtney.
Absolutely.
Regarding voting, if one has a direct financial substantive interest, not allowed to vote, do we have an ordinance or a rule that does not allow us to be part of the discussion?
I'll have to read the technical portion. Actually, I'll have Michelle maybe pull it up and get you an answer for the end. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Because I know we've heard advice that you should not be part of the discussion. In fact, you should not even be in the room.
I think it's safe that you're not.
Right.
You know, and usually we have cases like that. You know, I'll even say we'll contact our legal counsel and get their opinion.
Right.
But oftentimes you err on the side of caution. You know, it's, for example, say the Stottlemyre parcel over here was to go heavy industrial and you lived in Savannah and your parcel backed up to it. Okay, you may have something at that point. It's not a direct financial interest, but it could be a financial impact, you know, having an industrial site go next to your house. And those are the ones where we just end up having conversations. Now, we have had in a case where there was a council member in the past, this town-wide rezoning. You know, how can you not vote on a town-wide rezoning? So it was like, it could impact you, it could not impact you. In that case, it was fine. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to obtain a vote since every single person's parcel was being changed.
Right.
It was whether one of those ones was, say, a previous like Parks and Greenway, and suddenly was going up to a regional activity center. You know, that may be the part, but even when we had one where it was much more fine than that, they were still able to participate in this discussion. But she will look for the answer, and we'll have it here in a bit.
We can do that offline if you like, Michelle.
Do that as well.
Let's move along on the agenda. But
Yeah, I'm trying to find out if there's something in the appointed body. I know there's a conflict of interest provisions in the UDI. I just don't know what it's off the top of my head.
I think, as Esther's pointing out, it's kind of a moral obligation to recuse yourself. But
So then I have a question about that. So let's say you were prevented from speaking in the board. Could you come before the board as a citizen to bring your point of view, or is that still sort of poisoning the well because you're part of this group? I mean, that would be an interesting sort of place to take that to.
We've done it in the past.
I know on the state level, I sit on some boards where even if you recuse, you are still allowed to give comments. On the state level, I know they do allow you, even sitting on the board.
We'll find out the answer because again, we don't have. Our regulations may be more stringent. You know, for example, we notify people within 500 feet, not just next door. So we'll look into it and get the answer.
Could I ask another question? And you can put it on offline if you will. But how it seemed to me in the presentation, it was very important that people register prior to making comments, and I've noticed that we don't always enforce that, and I'd like to know how strict that is, if you will, and you can talk about that offline as well.
I can answer the question. Sometimes people don't realize they have to, in fairness. It's a citizen, they're not versed. It's really the chair's call. You know, if it's one person out there that showed up, are you going to turn them away? And we'll get their information. Flip side is 100 people show up and 100 people want to speak and none of them have signed up. That may, and then be the chair's like, one person can represent the whole. Or we'll continue the hearing, everybody will have to sign up and come back next time. Or we can sign up the first 30. So there's a couple of different ways. I think it's kind of the situation. We've been fairly informal about the 3-minute rule here. I mean, we technically can enforce it. We'll be bringing back this year kind of a planning board handbook, and that's some of the stuff we'll cover. I mean, do you want to take the hard rule? Say it's not always fair to the citizen, but in a controversial case, do you want 5 hours of public comment? So there has to be, and I think those are some of the decisions we can make, and then we can put them into our packet and make sure that we're then meshing them with overall board requirements that come out of the town clerk's office and have good discussions to see where you want to go. But there is some flexibility currently.
Thank you.
speaking of public comment, item 6. Seeing no public here, I assume there's no comment. So we can move on and jump 7 to go to number 8. Carrie.
Okay, maybe a little bit more fun, lighthearted topic to end the evening.
I think it's deadly serious. You actually have to do something here.
So I'm going to be presenting the Spring Yard of the Season finalists. As you may recall, this program originally started out of the Community Appearance Committee and then has been continued on in its new form with you all as the voting body. Here's the presentation. So for this round, we had a couple different nomination methods. If you recall, last season we started doing some more publicity through the town's various social media accounts and used those as a mechanism to collect nominations. And this time we got some nominations from the town's Nextdoor account, which is another type of social media platform that the town's been using. We also got several nominations from the police department again, as well as from our inspections department and the planning department. Total, we received 16 nominations. Staff narrowed that down to 9 semifinalists that we posted on the town's Facebook page so that the public could weigh in on those semifinalists. We've included some of the stats there. There were a little over 2,000 views of the post and 70 people who reacted to the pictures, by liking them or in some way or another. And we're bringing those top 4 from those 9 to you to vote on. So some of the general judging criteria is that any residence is eligible and only one will be selected. Can't win more than once per calendar year. This is the first one for 2017, so don't have to worry about that for this year. And only the front yard will be viewed. And this theme for the spring yard of the season is kind of your traditional aesthetic topic. So the judging criteria are well-maintained landscaping, that the yards are free of debris and clutter, and looking for colorfulness, creativity, and originality. So I'm going to show you pictures of the top 4. So we've got this one on Leafy Creek Drive, this one on Bradson, this one over in Kitts Creek, and this one in Chessington, and I can go back to any of them if you'd like.
Can you put them side by side?
Put them side by side? I don't think so.
That's fine.
But I'll take
Craig has
that.
pictures printed if you want. I don't know if he might.
Okay, and next time we'll arrange them
Huddle
side by
around.
side so you can see them for a better comparison. Okay, do you want me to go back to any of them?
I think if you could cycle through them again, that would be good.
Okay. So I'll go back. Number 1. And this one I have to say, I've only put one picture up for each yard, but they do have some nice plantings kind of up along the porch that the homeowner actually provided some supplemental pictures to the Facebook post.
I was wondering about that because, if one of the themes is color, that one seems to be lacking, but maybe it's covered by those.
Yeah. I don't want to bias you, but this one did receive quite a number of likes on Facebook. All right, this one, I nominated this one, but that doesn't matter.
Look at that's not your house. No.
Okay, number 3.
Various colors, even in the flowers.
And number 4.
Okay. All right. Let's try this one. I think so. Let's see. Good-looking house. It's such a hole.
Okay, if you want one more cycle through, I can do that. If not, I'm going to go back through each one, and I'll just ask you, to...
Yeah, we need to make a motion for this. How official does this need to be?
Yeah, I think the last time we voted, there was not quite so many options, but I'll just go through to say number 1. Anybody who wants to vote for number 1, you can, raise your hand or vocalize your support, and we can go through each one. So, do you feel ready, or do you want to take one more last look?
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. So, any votes for number 1?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. Okay. All right. What about for number 2? Okay. Number 3. Okay. And number 4.
I really like number 4.
Can do both.
Okay.
Can do both.
Esther's following my advice. Vote early, vote often.
Okay, so it looks like number 4 is the winner. So thank you for your participation in that. And then just wanted to give a little bit of information on our next round. So we did end up extending the deadline for the spring yard of the season so we could have an opportunity for some more nominations. So our summer yard of the season, which we're already in the summer, the theme is sustainability. And the nomination deadline is September 1st. So for this one, the criteria has to do with conserving natural resources like water and fossil fuels. So, using plants that are more efficient in their water intake, don't need to be watered so often, using native plants that support plant diversity and wildlife. So things like, rain gardens. Also, like rain barrels would be another way to conserve water and reuse water. Using applications that are non-toxic and minimize the amount of synthetic chemicals used, as well as landscaping and planting designs that work with nature. So those are just a few ideas. So certainly if you know anybody who's practicing these things, please encourage them to nominate their yards. We're going to also reach out to the Morrisville Environmental and Recycling Committee, since I'd imagine some of them might be leaders in that area. In our community liaison staff member has recently updated our HOA contact list, so I think we'll be trying to do some outreach through them as well.
Thanks, Carrie. Just as a final comment on that, I think it's great to see more people entering the competition than we've seen in the past, so that's good to see.
So moving on, my apologies, moving on to staff comments. I did something a little bit different this time, and I attached the newsletter, the monthly newsletter, to the agenda, so you'd have a chance to take a look at it and see what's been approved, what's been submitted. And again, you can track on our online interactive map the project, the process that projects are going through. So after you see them approved, they could stay approved for 6 to 8 months before they enter the construction status, and that's updated online. Those at your leisure. The other little kind of a housekeeping note for everybody is that we've always posted our audio online. So after the meeting was completed, the audio went online. The audio was removed when minutes were adopted, and the meeting from the next meeting's audio was updated. As part of our previous server issues that we were having, I a comprehensive look at our servers to make sure they're secure and there's no potential ways from somebody on the outside to get in. Well, the server where we housed all of our audio files was a server that people could come in, get the information, and go out. Well, it was one of those potential, risks for our IT department, so we can no longer post the audio the way we used to online. So one of the potential solutions to address that is we, as you're aware, town council meetings are video streamed live. So we could either A, video stream live, or B, just audio stream live, and then that company posts it online and handles it just as normally staff would have. So tonight was the first night that we actually not video streamed, but audio stream lived. The board, there's no intention at this time to do any video streaming. It's just audio, but if you go and you'll see, just watch it actually in theory, but there's just going to be a town seal in the background. So I just wanted to let everybody know that there's a little bit of a change that occurred out there, and it was really to address an IT need that was here at the town.
So we'll still be able to go back and look and listen to older. It's not just streamed once; it's still saved.
It's saved there. I will have to double check. We typically would then delete it once the minutes were adopted. But I will have to find out how, if this stays 3 years, 2 years. I don't know what the archiving policy is, so I will find that out and bring that back to you.
I don't see how you resist the comment that we all have a face for audio. So
I'm sorry?
we all have a face for audio. I think that would have been there.
I certainly have a face for audio. So, so we're moving forward with that. But with that, I just kind of wanted to do some quick housekeeping guidance for this audio streaming. The mics are really sensitive. So I just have a couple things that I was going to quickly go over. I'll email them to you as well at the end of the meeting. But when you're up there, you can see the microphones that are on the tables. They have a green light on them. If the green light is not on, you cannot be heard. So to keep that in mind. So 2 things. One, it makes it more difficult for Marty to take, minutes if she cannot hear what you're saying. And then, of course, you're not picked up for the audio, so anybody watching from home and wants to listen to everybody speak, they're going to miss out on that opportunity. When you have a cell phone sitting up there on vibrate, the vibrate will be picked up. Just like if you are fidgeting papers, stacking stuff, or have any personal awkward moments, all that's captured. So to kind of keep that in mind, that it's really sensitive and it will pick up every single noise up there. Also, when you're speaking, make sure that you're really leaning somewhat towards the microphone, not leaning back in your chair, not talking towards the person sitting to your left or your right. So that way, again, the audio is picking up your comments. Importantly, you need to assume the microphone is on at all times. We do try to put them in mute if we go and take a break. However, there's going to be a portion where somebody has to walk up and hit the mute button. So be really careful with the audio, just so that you don't say anything that you don't want anybody to hear. It's public record. Next is, again, if we call a recess, we're going to be the ones responsible for muting. But again, just make sure that you are really careful with what you say. So we're going to kind of hit on that one again. Because we have had issues in the past with things being said, and I don't think that people really meant for it to be picked up on audio. Those are the quick things for housekeeping that I have for this evening. I do have an answer, though, to the question on the conflict of interest for this board. And so every board's a little bit different, but for this board, you shall not participate in the review of or vote on any development application where the outcome of the matter is reasonably likely to have a direct, substantial, and readily identifiable financial impact. So you could not even participate in the conversation. So I would say that would mean you couldn't come up to during the public comment session and even talk.
Could or could not.
Or do this, that would be participation.
Okay. It'd be interesting to get a correct opinion, because you're almost taking away someone's rights as a citizen by doing that.
Well, I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have your neighbor come speak on your behalf.
Well, I guess that's true either way. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the one where and again, it has to do with a financial impact. So if it's going to cause more traffic or you don't like it, you can participate in all this. This is truly about financial. And the ones where I've really seen that happen is it's your property being rezoned. You just couldn't participate in that process. Because usually if you're asking to be rezoned, it is to increase the development potential, which can impact you. So, but I'm happy to talk to our attorney.
I just wondered the context if that was written. It almost sounds like it could be written participate, meaning participate in the discussion of the group, not participate as a citizen of the town of Morrisville.
I'm happy.
But I mean, who knows? I'm just thinking about it's never going to be a problem for me probably, but other people down the road. I mean,
certainly. Okay. Any other questions?
No, that's good. So you're going to go to your comments about May and June.
Oh, I'm happy to cover them. So in May, and again, I apologize, this one was late. when we had our server issues, and then it honestly slipped my mind. So we had 2 new applications submitted. So one is on 6001 McCrimmon Parkway. It's for an office building that's near Liberty Rose Drive. And then 1012 on Morrisville Parkway. It's a reuse of a structure to turn it into triangle badminton. So those are the new projects that are in review. We also had approved several plans. We approved the Element Hotel, which is on Airport. We approved some minor elevation changes to Park West Village related to some new tenants. We also approved a parking deck for INC, and there's some cell tower co-locations that were approved. Council approved Myers Point Town subdivision as well as an annexation for 804 Airport Boulevard. And really we had kind of 2 employee highlights, one of which I know everybody knows about because everybody's met Elliot, who's new to the department. But what you may not know is that Ben completed the municipal administration course. This is a course that takes him out of the office for about 6 months, a week at a time. And then more importantly, which I didn't put up here, he got hitched. So when you didn't see him here for a little while, he was enjoying some time off as a husband. So changed of duty, and I did give him a hard time. The first day he came back to work, he didn't have a wedding band on. I was like, he's been gone for a little while. Was this a legit deal or not? So, and he quickly pointed out that his wife, when he got home, asked him why he didn't have the wedding band on. So I think we all gave a little bit of rubbing that day for him. Moving on to the June items. Oops, I believe I hit the wrong one here. Or actually, just went in a different way. So a new site plan and construction project that was submitted is the residence at Shiloh Crossing. It's a multi-family development located near Walmart. We also approved the food hub site is where the farmers market will be permanently housed, if you will, and we also approved the construction plans for Morris Place. Town Council approved Sheldon Park subdivision, and they also approved the changes to the definitions related to multifamily hotel. And then again, we have a new special event process here. So if you are participating or having anything that really impacts the road network, or it's open to the general public where it normally wouldn't be, you would need to make sure that you pull a special permit. There's some late fees now associated with it. There's several different tiers. Typically we see this for road races and things along those lines, but just to be mindful of that. And if anybody asks you, hey, can we have a block party in our neighborhood? While it's not open to the public, if you are closing a road off for your block party, you would need to pull an event. So kind of pass that along to your neighbor. There's brochures, here in this building, the planning department. There's some in the fire administrative offices as well as Parks and Recreation, because people will typically show up any of those locations. And if you go to the town webpage, on the bottom left-hand side, there's a link that will take you straight to all the information for it. So at this point, since we're getting a lot more road race requests and things along those lines, we really had to have a more formalized process to address all that. And that is it from my end, and I will turn it over to the chair for committee comments.
Thank you, Courtney. Quick question. The residents at Shiloh Crossing, is that going to come before the board?
Is it going to come before the board? Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you. And congratulations, Benjamin. So, are we a board or a committee these days?
Apparently you're a committee tonight. It's the standard thing. We'll have to catch it next time.
Okay.
I
right.
stared at the thing 4 times, and it wasn't until it was literally up there that I'm like, oh boy.
Okay. Vinny, any comments, questions? Esther?
No. Elliot, I didn't get a chance to talk to you earlier. I'm more interested in the other fellow that came to this area from UNC Wilmington, and I had a chance to talk to him about basketball about a month ago. So I'll tell you the same thing I told him. We're behind you, win or tie. No, welcome, and thanks for all you guys do. We've had a couple of opportunities in the past month that we were invited to, thanks to staff including us, and we always appreciate that. Although I find when I go to events like that, staff never speaks to me, but that's okay. I get it. And Ben, congratulations to you as well.
Other comments?
I was actually going to ask, maybe Craig, could you give us your background on that committee meeting that you went to?
Yeah, it was interesting. I'll start off. I see council member TJ is here, and he was there as well, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. I know all the staff were there. They marched in just like they should, and all shook their heads every time Courtney said something. So that was a good job by staff.
This is the development council thing.
Right. And the second thing I noted is all the developers joined in unison at the close of the meeting saying, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." I don't know what they were talking. So those my two funny ones. It was a good meeting. Developers seem to have a lot of good things to say about the process of plan approval. I think Courtney did a great job of listing all the non-starters. Made it pretty clear to all of them. I think it was pretty clear there. I wish more people were there. I think my biggest takeaway was that one of the developers said it. He made the statement. He said, "It used to be whatever used to be," means that when you looked at a project, town of Morrisville was a town that you didn't go to because of the bureaucracy and the long time it takes to get a set of plans through. There are just too many regulations. And now they state that's not the case at all. Hence my little joke about ding dong and which is dead. I think they like the management, the council or something, but they feel like it's a lot better now. So kudos to all of you who participate in that and make that happen. I think it's a good job. I know TJ said we want to be number one, and so if council says that, that's what we want to be, and I think that was important as well. But I think as staff, they deserve a lot of compliments because certainly the development community had a lot of good things to say about everything that was done, and I think it was fair too. It wasn't all one-sided, so that was there.
Thank you, Craig. So I have no comments this evening, except I hope to be with you next month, despite the fact my term is coming up soon, which is item 11. I think we jump straight to item 13. Entertain a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.